everyone, Brad here, and in this video I'm going to be forging a fillet knife out of some coil spring. Let's get started. So I've drawn out this coil spring into a flat and usable piece of steel. Now I'm gonna go ahead and start shaping it into a knife. I'll start off by forging the point and then I'll move on to the handle. Alright, that's about as far as I'm gonna go with the grinding right now. I started at a low grit and I brought it up to about 220 and it's getting pretty thin. Already has a good amount of flex to it. It's gonna have a lot more though by the time it's finished up. Now, quenching a very thin blade into oil is a recipe for disaster. I'd expect to get a horrible warp, so what I've done is I've left a good amount of meat on this blade and I'll focus on polishing this blade and bringing it down to its final thickness once it's tempered. I'll just be careful to keep it cool, that way I don't ruin the heat treat. So I'm just using a piece of rebar to preheat the oil before quench. This blade is so thin, I don't want such a harsh transition between hot and cold. Alright, so I'm just gonna go ahead and let this blade air cool. That'll help normalize it and equalize the grain structure. With the blade this thin, it's gonna have all that flex, and if it's really put to use, I don't want it to crack, and this should help prevent that. Alright, the blade has been quenched and it is in the tempering oven. It always makes me a little bit nervous to quench blades as thin as this one. I'm happy I left some meat on the blade because it came out of the quench nice and straight. Once it's done tempering, I'll focus on polishing the blade and actually bringing it down to its final thickness, which will add some real nice flex, as most fillet knives should have. Alright, so the blade itself is completely finished and now it's time to move on to the handle. This thing is razor sharp, it can perform surgery and should have no problem slicing up some fish. I'll be using a piece of brass as a bolster up towards the front of the handle, and I'll actually be welding on a threaded tang and using another piece of brass and creating a threaded pummel on the back. I'm excited to see this one all finished up. Let's move on to the handle. Alright, so I've cut up the leather I'm going to use for this handle. I'm just using, it's probably an 8 or 9 ounce leather. This is the same stuff that I use to make my sheaths. So I've just made use of some scrap material that I probably won't use. And I'll also be using a little bit of black G10 to space things out a little bit and add some contrast throughout the handle. Now I've mentioned that I'm going to be adding a piece of threaded rod onto this tang, and that's just so that I can add a threaded pummel. So leather is slightly spongent and it'll compress just a little bit. So being able to add a threaded pummel on here will kind of act as a clamp, and I'll just be able to turn this down. It'll help compress all of those layers of leather. Now here's a quick look at an old Puko that I made, and it's kind of the same fashion. You'll have to excuse all the dirt that's on here, but it's got both a brass bolster and a brass pummel back here. And this was threaded and it helped kind of compress all of that leather. So I'll be doing that again with this one. And I actually happen to already have a piece of this leather drilled out and tapped. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this rather than re-tap the hole. But just so you know, what I used was a 1/4 inch 20 tap. Now I've left myself with quite a bit of tang, and it's definitely more than I'm gonna need for the handle. So I'm gonna go ahead and figure out just what size this handle is gonna be. I'm gonna cut it to shape, and I'm gonna go ahead and actually slot this rod. That way I can slip it over the tang, and then I'll tack weld it on either side, and that should be just fine. Now if I went ahead and I cut and I welded this piece of threaded rod onto the tang right now, it would prevent me from sliding on a fitted bolster. So what I need to focus on right now is fitting the bolster, and then I'm gonna go ahead and weld the tang on and get all the pieces assembled. handle material thrown together and rough shaped. The leather was a little bit oversized. I just wanted to remove some of that material that I'm not gonna need because that'll save me some epoxy in the glue up stage. I'm starting to visualize what this handle is gonna look like, and I'm pretty stoked about it. It's been quite some time since I've done a leather stacked handle, and I've really been itching to do one lately. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna pull this handle apart, get all these components in line, and then I'm gonna start mixing up some epoxy, and we'll make this permanent. This has been another fantastic learning experience for me. I don't have a whole lot of practice forging fillet knives, and I learned a lot throughout this process. I'm loving the way that this blade came out. I'm always a huge fan of the stacked leather handles. The leather adds such an antique look, and I think that it looks great with a nice polished edge. Well, thank you all so much for watching. Drop any comments down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this blade. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.